Think before you act. As a young child, Tim was always impulsive and impetuous. He never thought twice before acting, and often found himself in trouble before he even knew what was happening. Despite repeated warnings from his parents, he simply couldn't control himself, and fortunately, this inability to think ahead and consider the consequences of his actions would soon lead to a serious mistake. It all started one sunny Saturday afternoon. Tim was bored and looking for something to do. So, he decided to go for a walk in the nearby woods. He had done this countless times before, and knew the area like the back of his hand. As he wandered deeper and deeper into the forest, he began to feel a sense of adventure and excitement building within him. It was then that he spotted a small stream, still and peaceful in the dappled sunlight. Without thinking, Tim ran to the edge of the stream and began skipping stones across the water. He was having a great time, lost in the simple pleasure of watching the stones skip across the surface of the water. But then he noticed something moving beneath the water, a small, wriggling fish. All of a sudden, Tim had an idea. He would catch the fish. He didn't have any fishing gear with him, but he figured he could just use his bare hands. Determined to catch the fish, he waded into the stream and splashed around, trying to catch the wriggling creature. For a few minutes, it seemed like he might succeed. The fish darted and turned, but Tim was agile and persistent. But then, disaster struck. As he lunged forward to grab the fish, Tim's foot slipped on the slick, wet rocks beneath the water. He tumbled forward, arms flailing, and plunged headfirst into the stream. When Tim emerged from the water, gasping and dripping, he realized with a sense of panic that his glasses were gone. They must have fallen off during his tumble into the stream. Without them, he was as good as blind. He could barely make out the blur of the trees and bushes around him, let alone find his way back to the path through the woods. At first, Tim tried to stay calm. He stood there in the stream, feeling the icy water swirl around his ankles, and tried to think of a way out of his predicament. But the more he thought, the more his mind raced. What would his parents think? How would he explain this? Would they be angry? Would they punish him? As the minutes ticked by, Tim began to feel more and more desperate. He called out for help, but his voice was weak, and there was nobody around to hear him. He tried to remember the way back to the path, but everything looked the same, his heart pounding in his chest. He began to realize just how big a mistake he had made. Hours went by. The sun began to sink low in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Tim was cold, hungry, and scared. He had tried everything he could think of to find his way out, but he was hopelessly lost. It wasn't until the stars came out that he finally gave up, collapsing onto a bed of leaves and pine needles. He cried himself to sleep. It wasn't until the next morning that Tim was finally found. His parents, who realized he hadn't come home, had called the police. A search party was quickly organized, and after several hours of combing the woods, they found the frightened and exhausted child, huddled among the trees. In the days that followed, Tim struggled to come to terms with what had happened. He had made a mistake, a big one. He had acted impulsively, without thinking, and as a result he had put himself in real danger. But he had also learned a valuable lesson, one that would stay with him for the rest of his life. From that day on, Tim made a conscious effort to think before he acted. He learned to consider the consequences of his actions, to weigh up the risks and benefits, and to take responsibility for his choices. He still had his impulsive streak, of course, but now he was able to channel it in more positive ways. He threw himself wholeheartedly into his hobbies and interests, exploring the world around him with a sense of curiosity and wonder. Looking back on that fateful day in the woods, Tim knew that it had been a turning point in his life. He had faced his fears and emerged stronger and wiser for the experience. He knew that he would never forget the lesson he had learned, that you should always think things through before doing something rash, or you might just end up regretting it.